What happens when Sonic dies? There's an animation that basically shows the limbo of all the Sonics who died across Sonic's past lives and adventures, which shows that he is actually a totally reckless guy and ends up causing trouble here in Hell since many lives were lost so that the real current Sonic could live. Man, this is one of the creepiest animations I've ever seen here on YouTube itself. It was actually recommended by you guys here in the comments, so type F in the comments because Sonic is gone. And it was part of a mini-series called Sonic First Life, Sonic's First Life. It's actually a sequel that's pretty much a prequel, right? It comes earlier in the story's timeline, but it's actually the second animation that started with the story of Sonic's last life. And it puts Sonic in this little purgatory where pretty much everything he's ever lived through was actually full of lost lives that he let fall into limbo. That's how his story begins, man. With classic Sonic living in his cave, wanting to explore different places that, in this timeline, he's never seen. And there, in Grand Hill Zone, he ends up getting a taste of freedom, but he also ends up stumbling and running into one of Robotnik's badniks. The Motobug faces him and does what it was programmed to do. It attacked that animal, and that's how Sonic died. He wakes up in a strange place with some kind of checkpoint lighting up, and he's in a completely dark place with something on his head that he can't take off without hurting himself. Yeah, man, this animation is a lot heavier because it has this slightly darker theme. Actually, Mastod's animations play with the freedom and meta elements of video games, and we can already pick up on the little references here. The series is called Sonic First Life, so it makes sense for him to die to the first enemy in the first Sonic game, the Motobug in Green Hill. And the checkpoint would be that kind of post that lights up when Sonic passes by it, but like the wound stays permanent on him and he can't do anything about it without feeling a lot of pain or discomfort from it. The series is really much more brutal in that regard. But since he's the first hedgehog, he tries to find a way out of there, but there's only one light in that place and he keeps running in the dark. The only thing that happens is that when he ends up reaching another checkpoint post, he ends up finding another hedgehog who had fallen there. He says he was practically running through Grand Hill until he mysteriously tripped and fell, and came face to face with this place as if he had woken up after falling or being knocked out anyway. And when he turns his back, the first Sonic ends up noticing. He was hit in the back and ended up inside there. It's around this point that we start to realize that this is the story of all the Sonics from those lost lives. You know when you die in the game and you basically end up here? Or you restart the story? So when you restart, you already know what to do to avoid dying. That's exactly the concept of this animation. And here it shows exactly what happened to each of those other hedgehogs that are gone. In fact, they end up meeting many other hedgehogs. One of them is Sonic, who ended up falling on the spikes, and they end up gathering here with several others who appeared in different situations. You can clearly recognize where each one died. One fell on the spikes, another drowned. One was even hit by a stake from the labyrinth zone. And the saddest part of all is that each of them ended up here with part of their body deformed, exactly because of the way they died in each of the games. The first Sonic tries to find some kind of way out, but he doesn't have any, man, no answers at all. He keeps running around there trying to make sense of it all, and it seems like each one went further than the other hedgehog that shows up there. The more they go through, the more time they spend, the more hedgehogs they find in that place, because as time goes by, more Sonics die, and this is where the big twist comes in, and the meta element we're familiar with. They come across a strange monitor. A really creepy monitor, let's put it that way. Maybe it reminds you of Sonic's Extra Life monitor. And when they look at it, they see the Extra Life icon. And then they start to see, for example, different moments when each of them ended up running. And here or there, you get a rough idea of how each one died. For example, Sonic's first life died here after a Motobug attack. The others defended themselves, but it explains here and there why each ended up there. Another one was hit by a laser in the back. Another was attacked in the labyrinth zone. Anyway, several different places, and this was a demonstration of pretty much how each of them went through there. But they end up seeing places where Sonic had never been before. So what was happening there was actually happening in real life, in real time. And the first Sonic kind of ends up having some hope that this could be some kind of connection to the Sonic who's still alive, as if he had succeeded, and that he could give some help so they could get out of that place, but they just can't help, man. They try to do something and give some kind of signal so the original living Sonic could get out of there. But they also end up kind of getting in Sonic's way a little, making each of them die in completely different situations. They realize that through that monitor, there's some way for them to use all the knowledge they have, so they can interfere with Sonic's universe, trying to communicate through messages, dialogue, badnik symbols, and possession. Seriously, Sonic possessing the badnik is one of the things I never imagined the series would include, but they did, which is funny. But by interacting with the monitor itself, he's able to create some interference, to stop Sonic from bouncing and jumping around so he doesn't get hit, even helping him to finish the story of the first game, facing Dr. Regman in the final boss fight, and it's also one of the easiest in history, defeating Robotnik and sending him away. Everyone celebrates because in a way, they managed to save the real Sonic's life, but they think that could be the salvation for their own lives too. But what didn't help was finding out that actually the story continued with Sonic 2 showing that in reality, Sonic is going to stay in that limbo forever, because he's always on a new adventure and helping Sonic keep going on new adventures in the future. And the one who died first, poor guy, was forgotten. So much so that they stay like this, shocked by the next game, trying to help and guide to the next adventure until they can't anymore. What happens is that a lot of time passes until modern Sonic shows up here, and then we see him getting into all sorts of situations like this, where he can't even communicate with the current living Sonic anymore, which becomes inevitable since Sonic will always end up getting screwed and dying, and entering that limbo along with the others. The first Sonic gets upset with this situation, but he noticed a pattern. If everyone communicates at the same time, he can help the current, living Sonic by giving him tips to stay alive, as if it were a sixth sense, like a thought in his head. In other words, making it so the real living one keeps following the good tips, to avoid the way the others died in past lives, and that made the Hedgehog become an increasingly skilled warrior, managing to survive much more danger than he had faced before. But he got a little relaxed, because the guy is literally blindfolded, and he's there, fighting everyone. That's the point of the story. He has practically become a very arrogant guy, because he thinks he will never die, you know? He thinks he'll always survive, but actually, he will die. It's just that he's following tips from other hedgehogs, who have already been through that and know how to survive in that moment of death. Sonic's first life becomes a little more hopeful and a little suspicious, because it seems like that never ends, and it looks like they'll never get out of there. And Sonic himself in real life practically becomes that guy who doesn't think he's going to die, because he believes he has some kind of strange sense. And it will practically make him know what to do at the right time in every moment. And the Sonic from the first life looks at that. And he sees how much of an idiot he ended up becoming, transforming. Because the guy got into this. He thinks there will always be a little voice telling him what to do so he doesn't die, which were Sonic's past lives. But he will always end up dying, because there comes a point where the Hedgehog went further than everyone else, and this becomes an endless routine here. When he talks about this with Tails, he practically throws himself from the tornado towards the volcano, which is a completely stupid idea, and he's waiting for an answer to make it out alive, because he thought he was invincible. He simply gives up. He goes straight to certain death, becoming here the next Hedgehog to end up in that story, and the first Sonic who gets upset with that situation. And he realizes that it will never end, because there will always be a Sonic alive, and there will always be those who went before, precisely to try to give an answer and help the one who is still alive, who now thinks he's invincible. He gives up on helping the real Hedgehog who's still alive, and decides to explore that limbo, because where they are, there's practically no way out, leaving the group behind and going off on his own. He runs so much, that he practically ends up crossing through a dimension, arriving in a place that's a little more like the living world. A little more closer to some kind of paradise, but when he blinks his eyes, actually he's still in that limbo, because he's never going to be able to escape from that place. He simply falls to the ground, cries, and gives up. Which shows that actually in real life, Tails is still trying to understand why Sonic is acting so crazy like that. Because there are some strange disturbances coming from beyond, since there are no explanations, but Tails tries to understand what's happening. Man, this is one of the best Sonic animations on YouTube. It's British, from this channel called Mashed. I've already talked about it here. This animation is not the first one in this series, but in the timeline it would be the first. And that explains a lot. It's already finished, right? The third series at the time of this recording. I watched it live, but man, it's by far one of the best indie animated series about Sonic on YouTube. Really good quality, great voice acting. I wish they would translate it for Brazilian audiences. There are excellent voice actors who would love to come back to voice these characters. But it's not an official Sega product. It's a fan animation. Very well made. Excellent. And it's worth watching. I'll leave the link in the description and say hi in the comments. Thank you very much. Thanks, I'm out. See you in the next video.